All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us. Thanks for taking the time to tune into Co-innovating the future of hospitality and tourism in a post-pandemic era. I know it's a topical issue for a lot of us, so thanks for taking the time to join us for the next 2 hours. As we start, I'll introduce myself and my co-host for today. And we'll go through the panel and we'll have a really engaging and discussion with our esteemed panelists on the future of tourism and hospitality. And that will be followed by a discussion on actually going through the co-innovation process, some of the approaches, and what we're doing right now with the Industry Future Challenge and how you can take some of these lessons into your organization and design a learning lab. So without further ado, wanted to welcome everyone, and again, thanks again for joining us. Wanted to give a quick shout out to our partners, Amazon Web Services, Linux Foundation, and Magnet for supporting this initiative across 10 industries, hospitality and tourism being one of. Solar Chagpar. I'm the CEO and Chief Engineer at Prepr, and Caitlin McDonough is the Chief Education Officer, who will be the chair of the panel today. So just in case you haven't heard about Prepr and this is the first time you're interacting with us, our whole focus as an organization is to support the conversion of challenges into both learning opportunities as well as business opportunities. And so, a lot of organizations, especially now, are struggling with talent, especially with building the digital capabilities of that talent. And so what we do is we contextualize challenges from industry and bring those to organizations so that they can use their human capital and support innovation from within and also outside of the organization to support going through these processes. So at the end of the day, our whole focus as an organization, again, is to support these types of learning experiences, whether it's to support the commercialization of innovation or simply to support improving the learning agility of the human capital operation within an organization. We're able to do that by taking this challenge-based, project-based approach. So that's a quick introduction to Prepr. I'm going to pass the floor at this point to Caitlin McDonough, who will introduce our panelists and get the panel started.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Salar. I'm looking forward to a great panel, and I'd like to invite all of the panelists to join me, and we will get started. Welcome, Dario. Perfect. So Dario Giacini is the Director of Work Integrated Learning and Experiential Education and Global Mobility at George Brown College. He is a progressive and dynamic college administrator, certified human resources leader, and industrial engineer with over 20 years of professional experience within higher education and multinational organizations. He currently holds the role of Director of Work Integrated Learning at George Brown, and he's responsible for providing strategic leadership in developing sustainable college-wide work-integrated learning and experiential education programs, both locally and internationally. Previously, he served as chair of the School of Hospitality and Tourism Management from 2013 to 2018, where he brought his extensive industry expertise. This included more than 11 years with Starwood Hotels and Resorts, where he led the talent development team for the Canadian region and HR initiatives for the Sales and Revenue Management Division in the Toronto metro market. Dario, thanks so much for being with us.
Pleasure being here. Thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful. Next, I'd like to introduce Giselle Moda. She is a forward-thinking strategist and dynamic presenter of innovation, data-driven solutions, especially relating to the future of work and workplace learning. She brings humanity and innovative technology solutions to the future of work. Training and consulting has led Giselle to contribute to the small business, corporate, and academic spaces. She is most recently a principal consultant on the Future of Work, ADP, where she assists executives and HR practitioners with innovative human capital management strategies amidst digital disruptions such as artificial intelligence, automation, analytics, and many other future of work areas. With a master's in business with a focus on organizational design and change management, and a bachelor's in business management and marketing, she enjoys contributing to innovation and impacting organizational and individual success. I know we're going to have a lot to talk about. Thanks so much for being with us today, Giselle.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Joe Baker. He is a systems leadership and integrated strategy advisor who supports the Ontario Tourism Education Corporation's senior leadership team in their collaborative role in tourism and hospitality workforce recovery, alongside numerous industry and association partner organizations. Previously the dean at Centennial College's School of Hospitality, Tourism, and Culinary Arts, Joe led this most significant transformation in the school's over 50-year history. He designed programs and operations in an immersive experiential learning environment to align graduates with the skills required to serve the future workforce needs of the Canadian tourism industry. Before joining higher education, Joe worked in the restaurant industry both as an entrepreneur as well as in management capacity at high-profile organizations such as Oliver and Bonacini, Hospitality, and Keg Restaurants. With a Master of Education in Higher Education Leadership, a Bachelor of Commerce in Hospitality and Tourism Management, an extensive executive education, Joe is uniquely positioned to serve as a modern strategic tourism industry leader with a distinct focus on bringing education, training, and workforce innovation together to build a resilient and inclusive workforce. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And lastly, I'd like to introduce Beth Potter. As President and CEO of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, Beth leads the advocacy efforts for the tourism industry, promoting the importance of tourism as an economic driver and job creator for Ontario by fostering a collaborative relationship between business owners, tourism organizations, and governments. Collectively, TIAO represents over 200,000 businesses and close to 400,000 employees that are dedicated to promoting and operating the province's tourism infrastructure. An involved leader, Beth routinely works in partnership with other organizations to advance the policy work that TIAO undertakes on behalf of the industry. These partnerships include the Council of the Great Lakes and the World Travel and Tourism Council, the international organization that works to raise awareness of travel and tourism as one of the largest economic sectors. A recognized leader with more than 25 years of experience in the not-for-profit and tourism sectors, Beth has worked with a variety of boards, committees, and volunteers across the tourism industry and from all walks of life. She carries a firm belief that volunteers make the world go round and has proudly served on many industry boards, including the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. She currently holds a board seat for the Metro Toronto Convention Centre and Tourism HR Canada. Thanks so much for joining us today, Beth. We're very much looking forward to this.
My pleasure to be here.
All right, well, why don't we jump into it then? For our audience, we are happy to take questions as we go as well. So please do send those through in the stage chat and we will take those as they come. Depending on relevance, if there are some, I might leave them to the end, but please do send them through as they come up. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the hospitality and tourism sectors, undoubtedly some of the hardest hit by the pandemic. The impacts of coronavirus have been far-reaching, from the extensive lockdowns and border closures imposed by governments to the changing consumer behaviors. An economic insights report released by the Government of Canada in October 2020 reported that travel restrictions could lead to a reduction in GDP for the tourism industry of almost 50 to 70% in 2020. This was also associated with a loss of 300,000 to 500,000 jobs. When we look globally, the United Nations World Tourism Organization expects international arrivals to decline by 70 to 75%. And this could mean that international tourism could return to levels that were 30 years ago. So we have this situation that many of us are very acutely aware of. Certainly many of the people who are joining us and tuning in for today's panel are very acutely aware of some of these challenges. But before we talk about the future of the industry, I want to reflect on the pre-COVID reality. And one of the challenges, particularly when we think about Canada, that we had been seeing was that there was a labor shortage. So in 2019, Canadian tourism was at its all-time high, but we also had 135,000 jobs in the tourism sector that were vacant. And this has implications as well when we look to recovery. So, Joe, I'd like to invite you to get us started and share some of what you've seen from a workforce perspective pre-COVID, and perhaps talk a little bit about some of the implications for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to set that context a little bit further, with 2019, 2018 and 2019 were Canada's two best consecutive years of tourism ever in our history. And 2019, there were 21.1 million overnight visitors to Canada. So before the pandemic, the tourism industry really was booming. And yet, as you framed, there were 135,000 jobs without skilled workers. And just to set that context against the scope and the span of the tourism workforce, we employ about 1 in every 10 working Canadians. That's 2 million Canadians working in the tourism sector in 2019 before the pandemic. And generally speaking, we use the tourism sector as the umbrella term, and there are 5 segments of that space: food and beverage, accommodations, those two add up most of the employment status, as well as travel services, transportation, recreation, and entertainment. And so that labor shortage was actually being experienced in a lot of small to medium businesses, as well as the large scale businesses, and it was hampering growth. Well, what a time to reflect on, considering the place that we're in now. But ultimately, there were 135,000 jobs without skilled workers, which leads us to say that the workers in our workforce don't necessarily have the skills required to satisfy the employment needs of the tourism sector across Canada. And that's why when we're in the situation that we're in now, as we come out of the other side of this pandemic, we are going to need to face that reality. It gives us a very important opportunity to reshape the workplace, to ensure that we are engaging our workforce, but also then as trainers and as educators, really starting to be disciplined about what skills we train in our workforce.
Thank you, Joe, for providing that context. Definitely important as we look to the future. Beth, perhaps you can add in, and I know you represent many tourism businesses. What have you been seeing, both pre-COVID and now, as we're feeling these acute impacts?
Well, just to kind of pick up and expand on what Joe was talking about, both pre and now, part of the labor challenge has been another policy issue, and that's around housing. When we've got we've worked so hard over the last decade and more and longer to build up some great destinations in our province, that we have outpriced the housing market for the people that need to work in those destinations, and that's really caused an ongoing and compounding problem. And so we, at TIO, we've been spending as much time speaking to the need for continued skills development for staff as we have for housing and good housing policy. And so we've worked at municipal and provincial levels on that. And then the third leg of the stool, so to speak, is immigration. And our tourism and hospitality schools here in Ontario, they've got amazing reputations, around the world, and so much so that we have a very high proponent of international students coming in. The problem is that our pathway to permanent residency is not a simple one, and so we often lose those highly skilled individuals that we could be moving into our sector to immigration issues as they return to their home countries.
Right, definitely. Another layer and a really important consideration as well. Just picking up on the education piece, Dario, I know when we were speaking the other day, you mentioned that there had been a period where we were seeing good enrollment, but that has dropped off in recent years. Perhaps you can also speak to that and how appealing the industry has been from a youth perspective as people are looking to future careers.
For sure, Caitlin. And Beth, a great point you brought up about the future of education in hospitality and tourism management, or in tourism in general, including culinary. we have, in the last, let's go back to 2010. From 2010 to 20, or maybe prior to 2010 to 2015, we've seen a steady uprise or interest in the hospitality industry, both domestic and international enrollment were going up in a steady mode. We reached 2015 and we started to see a big decline in domestic interest. When I say domestic, students from high schools in Canada joining, or any resident or domestic student, a Canadian, getting into the post-secondary education, in particular in hospitality. How we compensated that? We compensated that with international enrollment, because it was, going back to Beth, Canada is very well positioned when it comes to hospitality education in general, globally. So we compensated that decline with international enrollment. That's great. One question is that sustainable? Look at the pandemic, and we can talk a little bit more about that throughout the conversation today. And also the fact that many support, and I don't want to jump into topics, but a lot of support that may be available may not be available for international students, and going back to immersing them into the workforce. So happy to continue this conversation, and I know that this topic is going to come back soon when we talk a little bit about what is that we are doing to support the workforce.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, we're definitely going to dig into that a lot more. Giselle, I know we're talking largely about the Canadian context so far, but I know you do a lot, and really your focus is the future of work. Is there anything that you'd like to add related to that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear the statistics and what you guys are sharing about the Canadian market. It's very similar in the U.S., as a matter of fact. So in the U.S., about 70% of the metropolitan U.S. areas are staffed and working with people who are in the hospitality sector. About 10% of people work in that space in these areas. And so of those people who work in that space, we have seen, you guys have heard with the George Floyd incident that's happened in 2020, and how there's been a higher focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. I'd be remiss to say that most of the people who work in the hospitality space are often these minority groups and sectors. They've already had systemic issues, and having that job with many times being at the lower income level, it's been difficult for them. And so when we talk about skills, a lot of people have been furloughed, have been laid off. They have to think about what they do next. So I think a lot of the workforce in the United States in the hospitality sector are thinking, what is my next role? Do I live off of unemployment? How do I transition? Do I go back to school? What do I do? So there's that aspect of it. And then there's the aspect of employers who are also trying to think, how do we reskill people? Do we shift them into other areas? And when it comes to the future of work, a lot of these hospitality industries are embracing things like automation, robotic process automation, robotics themselves, all these different types of bots, to automate processes, even for health and safety reasons. So now the skill set is, how do we reskill perhaps some of the people to be able to manage a bot or manage some of these AI processes, et cetera, and oversee them. So it's going to be interesting to follow how the roles evolve with more technology coming into the sector. And then also interesting to see how employers step up to the plate to help the disparity that there is for those who are underserved.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect segue in terms of thinking about, from a technology perspective, what had been happening in the sector, and what sort of trends had we been seeing? So I know you touched on some, AI and automation and that sort of thing. But this can take on many different forms, right? I mean, when we look at IoT, that's being implemented in terms of smart airports and task automation at hotels and this sort of thing. Perhaps, Beth, you can speak to a little bit around, representing all of these different businesses. What had you been seeing from a technology adoption perspective? And has that been accelerated or changed at all as a result of the pandemic?
Well, certainly when it comes to providing that seamless traveler experience, technology and changes to technology are being investigated and implemented at the international level. You see things like biometrics coming into play, but at the local level, at the owner operator level, you're looking more at sustainability. Like what kinds of technologies can they implement to reduce their footprint? What kind of technologies can they implement to make it that seamless experience for the traveler at the local level? And so we're really seeing more and more of an uptick. We know that different parts of the country and different parts of the world are in kind of different places on the sustainability chart, but it really has become a key component of the conversation now. And then the other thing that owners are really grappling with is kind of the lead time that travelers are booking. And so they're needing to use technology as the lead time on reservations shortens. And I think that we'll see that it will shorten again as we come out of this pandemic, that they're needing to use technology to turn over guests quickly and to make sure that they've got inventory on hand and staffing, the appropriate staffing, and being able to move through those kinds of platforms. So it's interesting to see. You wouldn't think that you might not think as somebody walking down the street how much technology is influencing your travel and tourism experience, but it certainly is.
Mm-hmm. And you raise a really good point about the volatility in some ways of how quickly things have been changing over the past year and what that's done to lead times and reservations and so on. Joe or Giselle, would you like to add to that in terms of what you had been seeing from the technology perspective? I know, Giselle, you had started to speak to that somewhat. Would you like to go a little deeper in what you're seeing as well from the skills or education perspective?
Yeah, I think from an industry perspective, like Beth said, there are so many ways where technology is impacting the industry. So think of every touch point and then every process that goes behind the scenes for hospitality to be able to run its course. And because of health and safety and because of cost mitigation and risk mitigation, basically, people are trying to figure out, how do we put processes and systems in place so people can feel safe enough to come back and want to get out of their homes and engage with us in our hospitality sector? How do our employees feel safe as well, returning to the workplace? I'll talk about that in a second. And then how do we also keep costs down at the same time? How are we more efficient and less touch points? So even in the workplace, a lot of the things that I'm seeing for hospitality related clients is contactless. How can we make sure that even if it's people clocking in, using facial recognition in order to do so, which also has to be regulated and has to be overseen for issues that can be used wrong in unethical ways. So that's a whole nother topic. But I think that more organizations are leaning into, let's keep our people safe, and we need them to want to come to us as an employer of choice. So how do we mitigate any type of a risk? Contact tracing is another one, where people have been attesting at the clock and saying, I've been around such and such person, or I've been potentially exposed to COVID. All of that is happening. And just, again, how checking in for the mental health of the people as well, to feel safe psychologically, and having data to track these things and to have the visibility, and use of all types of technology to engage with people who are working remotely or virtually. So again, even at the workplace level, I'm noticing all these different changes and touch points with technology, where even HR people and CFOs and COOs are having to reskill and upskill themselves in how to engage with these technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. Some great points. Joe, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, the addition of, there is always going to be the integration of technology into the workplace. And yes, the pandemic has seen us embrace it more than we had before, whether it's communications technology, e-commerce technology, but at its core, the hospitality and tourism business is a service-centered business. And so if I was out there right now trying to discuss skills that are required for people to ultimately succeed and thrive in the future workforce, it's understanding how to leverage that technology to add more value to those service experiences. And the winners in the job market and the winners in the business market will be those who figure out how to do exactly that. Too much of one or too much of the other is going to be problematic for the future. But walking down that fine line, leveraging technology, integrating personality skills, communication, conflict management, emotional intelligence, all of that is going to ultimately help people succeed in the future.
Definitely. We have some questions coming in from the audience. So some of these are tie into what we've been talking about already. So let's take one of them here. What are the biggest gaps in terms of skilled labor for the industry? What jobs are in high demand but low supply? Is one part to the question. And then the follow-up is, how can digital education tools close the gap and scale education in a decentralized way? What would be a high-impact virtual learning program from a tourism perspective? So perhaps, Joe, you can speak to the job piece, and then Dario, I'd like you to add to the education side.
Yeah, sure. So the jobs that are actually in most demand right now, and certainly that was relevant pre-pandemic, were in the food and beverage sector, cooks and service staff, in the accommodation sector, housekeepers, and generally speaking, across the entire industry, middle-level managers. Those were the jobs that were in highest demand and in shortest supply. And I think what we're working on right now, and this has been a great reason for us to double the effort related to how we deal with this, is we are now trying to understand the skills and competencies that the workforce already has and how we can map those against the future opportunities. And I think that's what's really emerging now, is that skill set that is broadly applicable from one industry to another, especially as people start experiencing layoffs. Are there appropriate jobs in other sectors? And from a tourism perspective, that means how do we attract people who have skill sets from other industries that we can apply into ours to fill those gaps?
Absolutely. And Dario, perhaps you can speak to the education side, and how can we scale and how can we address some of these gaps that we're seeing?
I believe this is something that I'm going to say the recipe for success when it comes to education is that strategic partnership with industry and post-secondary institutions. We all, we do that. That's part of what in colleges in particular in Canada are known for, the connection with industry. But I feel that now we need to leverage that more than ever before. Technology and different type of jobs or different type of work is changing rapidly. And it's changing rapidly in the hospitality and tourism industry. So how do we, and the question is for post-secondary institutions and those responsible for programming to support the future workforce, how do we strategically partner with these institutions, these organizations, to bring that learning to life? As you know, funding in post-secondary institutions in Canada has decreased over the years, so we need to be very strategic how we bring that technology, because we don't have the money to buy the technology for all the students that come to our colleges. So, but that's an opportunity to engage with the private sector, with all of you, that are part of this call today, and see how can we together, work together in order to develop the future workforce. I can talk on strategic initiatives that we are doing, but and I'm passionate about that. But the key is the partnership with industry.
Yeah, I think that's. Sorry, go ahead.
Agreed.
I'd add to that and say that I think that part of that partnership, so two things came to my mind when both Joe and Dario were speaking. One, Accenture and a few groups got together during the pandemic at its height. And when there weren't people working in, for example, they didn't need as many people in the hotel spaces at a Marriott, for example, because they had to shut down. But a grocery store needed them. So these alliances started forming during the pandemic. And to your point, Dario, this is what we should be learning from. What did we, and I think it's a key takeaway, it's what has the pandemic taught us about how we need to partner, how we need to think outside the box, what technology should be in place. Because what they did is they shifted talent from the hotels and they sent them over to the grocery store. And some other person who needed to send talent elsewhere, they started doing that. I think we can continue doing that. And when you talk about both the workforce who's been displaced and students, how do you transition someone to work in a new area? There's a lot of components to be considered. Their childcare needs, their transportation. Should you create virtual opportunities for people that it was normally a position that was in a particular location? Like, how do you get the skills that you need? How do you prepare the landscape for a worker or a student to actually be able to transition? And that has to come through partnerships. That has to come through what you're talking about, Dario.
And to add to that, I'll just say, I think that one of the things that, and this is a cultural shift, is that I think we have to be mindful of the skills that our staff have in this industry. You know, it is, you know, one of the examples that I can say is we've lost an awful lot of flight attendants. They've been displaced. During the pandemic. And you know where a lot of them are working? They're working in support roles in the long-term care facilities because they have the customer service training, they have the health and safety mindset and training already. And so they're being with a little bit more training around specifics around feeding or end-of-life care. These, flight attendants are now supporting our most vulnerable population through this pandemic. And I think that's something that we as an industry need to take a little credit for. But I also think that tourism gets this bad rep because it's the low paying industry. It's what you do until you get a real job. It doesn't have a career connotation attached to it. And I say, I call that for what it is and say, no, it's not. That's not the case. We have very competent people who spend their life working in our industry, delivering amazing experiences for people. And everybody we talk to wants a fantastic, dream vacation. And who delivers it? Well, it's our people that deliver it. And so I think that we need to stand up and be a little prouder as an industry, and that's a culture shift that has to happen because it's been missing for a long time.
I love that.
Thanks, Beth. That's a great point. We have been getting a lot of good questions from the audience. There's one more that I want to take. For those of you who are sending your questions, continue to send them. Some of them we'll take at the end. But there is one here that I think is pertinent to the discussion. So they're asking, I think an important point to support the future workforce is decent pay rate and work conditions. There's a big problem in the hospitality industry with low rates, long hours, hostile work environment. Does any of those support to the future workforce take into consideration factors like pay rates, work conditions, and so on? So I don't know who would like to answer that, but both a comment in terms of working conditions and then where do we go from here? Sure, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at it. It is unfortunate that there are work environments that have those components in them. I think the unfortunate situation is that those kinds of conditions exist in many industries. And I would say if you are a worker out there, if you are somebody who has a job or is looking for a job or who has been laid off and trying to get back into the workforce, just remember, choose wisely. You ultimately control the opportunities that you accept or turn down. Yes, sure, people find themselves in situations where they have to take work that they may not want to. That's fine. That doesn't have to be forever. Take the job that you need to take and work towards finding an organization that you will want to work for. And all I can say is do your homework. do your research, take the time to find out, read those top 100 employer lists, reach out to your local agencies, reach out to your local networks, and choose the employer that you want to work for. With a skills shortage, a labor shortage, and optimistically, as the industry comes back online and we start seeing business levels return to normal, it will be a very hot job market. And do your best to present yourself as best you possibly can, and be very selective about where you work.
Yeah, and go ahead, Ben.
Sorry, I just want to add to that, you know, as we've come through this pandemic, one of the main focuses is preparing employers on, you know, implementing new protocols to keep not only their guests safe, but their employees safe. And so there's an awful lot of work that has happened in the last 11 months around training and around putting new protocols into place. And, you know, if you're out there and you're looking for work, ask about them. Ask what kinds of protocols have been put in place. Ask what kind of employee training is available to you so that you know that you are agreeing to work for someone who puts that at the forefront.
Absolutely. I was going to say that organizations that are thinking about their people now, one, I heard an interview the other day by a top CEO in a hotel chain, and he was saying, if we don't get our health and safety right and we don't give a sense of security, we can forget about revenue because no one's going to want to come to us. And that is the truth. So that same aspect, they are investing that level of priority into the workforce. If you, to Joe's point and Beth's, if you are interviewing for somewhere, ask, what is your diversity, equity, inclusion strategy? Like what have you been doing over these past few months? And research it too. Look them up. Ask about income security, food security. What have they been doing from a social responsibility stance for the community and for their workforce during these times? What did they do with the people that they furloughed or they had to lay off? Like, what have they been engaged with them at all? And I say all that because one of the key things that we're noticing about the future of work, more organizations are focused on their brand perception. If you want to have some business continuity, and you want to keep moving forward, you know, post-pandemic, you have to show that you care about your people. People have become like a top priority now, where before they were, sometimes people would just tout, we are an organization about our people. Not so much. You would notice that it wasn't the case in some cases, but now people have to put their money where their mouth is in some essence, and they're having to prove that, you know, here in the United States, I don't know if it's happening in Canada, but here in the U.S., even on your SEC, your 10K financial reporting, you have to prove what you're doing in HR and human capital management. You have to prove what you're doing towards diversity efforts. So now there's pressure from private equity firms, from you know, all kinds of sources from the government that are saying, fix this, fix how you're treating your people. And so that's the top area of concern.
Yeah, and the workforce should be a part of your sustainability planning.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this really leads into, you know, what does 2021 and beyond hold, right? So what does the future of the industry, the sector look like? So I want to talk a bit about some key trends, but before we get into some of that, you know, let's pick up on this workforce confidence piece. You know, what can and should individual businesses be doing to support that recovery and to, you know, be as appealing as possible? I know we've touched on a number of different aspects, but I just want to zero in on that.
So maybe I can start and just say that first of all, you know, the business owners, we're asking them to really educate themselves and get themselves involved in creating that health and safety environment, and not from your traditional occupational health and safety. Yes, absolutely. But the consumer's confidence right now in travel is low. And the number one thing they're going to be looking for is safe. They want to ensure their own safety when they're traveling. And so, you know, we've done a lot of work to put Ontario specifically and the rest of Canada, but Ontario specifically in a position to be equal on the global stage. So TIO, we're a member of the WTTC, the World Travel and Tourism Council. We've done a lot of work with them I've been on their COVID task force. I've been, I helped to develop some of the global industry standard protocols for different segments of our business, and we brought that back to Ontario. And with that, we also brought the Safe Travel Stamp. And so we now have close to 900 businesses in Ontario alone who have adopted protocols. They put them into place that line up with the global standards, and they can now say, we are a safe travel destination. We are a safe travel business. And so that's going to be a common global brand that consumers can look for. And I'm pleased to say we are one of over 200 countries around the world that have adopted the Safe Travel Stamp, so that we can be on, again, I go back to that seamless traveler experience. We want to develop consistency and continuity for our guests as they move from experience to experience and destination to destination.
You raise a good point, and in many ways, I suppose it's two sides of the same coin, right? We have the consumer confidence and the workforce confidence, and they really do go very much hand in hand.
Well, then there's the resident sentiment on top of it. I mean, we're battling a few different fronts here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, some people are just quite simply restless and impatient. Especially here in the US, I could see that, where there is consumer index, but it's also coming to a point where they're really ready to risk peeking out their head and go out, and there's so many cities and places here where people continue to gather and try to get out on vacation, and those who are being safe are trying to be more remote. So you see people moving even to more suburban areas, more going to nature retreats, and if they want to engage in hospitality or anything, it's and they're wanting to be safe, it's more remotely. So that's even something that's an interesting dynamic that's occurring here in the States. But yeah, I think customer index plays a role, the consumer index, but it's also restlessness and impatience plays a role too, where people are going to want to get back to some sense of normalcy. And it may be pushing some businesses to think faster and accommodate, because they want to be there for the people who are impatient and ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, what does it look like for businesses to help support that confidence? I mean, technology is certainly an enabler in this, and there's a number of ways that we've seen it implemented. But would one of you like to speak to that? How businesses should be thinking about building that confidence, and even if people are getting a bit more restless and ready, how do we make that an easier transition for them to say, like, yes, I do want to go?
I would like to kick that off with and looking at resource allocation before we talk about the possibilities of can be done. As we know, SMEs are the biggest SMEs, or small and medium enterprises in the hospitality sector, are the biggest employers when it comes to all the restaurants that we know. And these organizations, these SMEs, they need support in order to potentially bring all these technology resources or require training. I believe there is an opportunity for us to come together, and we've been doing this. Great organizations, part of the panel, fighting for our hospitality organizations. But how can we lobby the government, both at federal and provincial level, to support the implementation of either new technology, training, and resources to continue the business and also developing the workforce? There are great resources out there and great organizations supporting that. So I feel that we need to be very intentional with communicating what can be done, or the resources available for organizations.
Yeah, if I can build on that, Dario, well said. I think there are a couple of really important pieces of context here. First of all, business operators are really, for the most part, focusing now on survival. And they have faced some unbelievable conditions, and most of what they've been experiencing has been completely beyond their control. And I think we all need to have a huge amount of empathy and patience for those business owners. in those 2019 numbers that we referenced, with 2 million people in Canada working in tourism, they're working in 200,000 businesses. So think about the number of small businesses and the impact that this pandemic has had on the size of those small businesses, especially as they need to lay off staff or even, go through more challenging, business winding down cycles. But I would say, and I always say, this hospitality industry is a great community, and there are people, community leaders like Beth at Tayo. You should sign up for those associations. You should do as much reading as you possibly can. There are webinars posted constantly. There are resources that are constantly being put together to try to help you as a small business operator. And in this great sea of complexity and the great challenges we face, I often say, don't overcomplicate it. Think about somebody like the great Isidore Sharp, founder of Four Seasons Hotels. If you want to create a positive work environment for your workers, if you want to welcome them back post-pandemic, treat others the way you would want to be treated. The golden rule: keep it simple, keep it positive, and that will help you as you welcome back your workforce, and then ultimately as we welcome back our business levels.
Yeah, I agree. I think a people first mentality, even just in the workforce, it's needed across all industries. And like you said before, Joe, this is a space that is about service. It is about that human touch. Beth mentioned as well, I believe, where she was talking about people wanting a beautiful vacation. I want a beautiful vacation. I want like a break, and I look forward to the service that I get from hospitality workers. It's a beautiful experience. You look forward to it. So putting people first, I think, like I said before, organizations have spoken about this a lot, but now I think those who will stand out and those who will truly lead in the future are going to be those who truly show that they are about their people, that they look at every process and they don't leave people behind. Even if they integrate technologies, like I talk a lot about artificial intelligence and the power of machine learning, even goes without mentioning, like organization network analysis is great to check to see in your organization, where are those skills? Who are those key people? Who are they connected to with analytics? Where are those skills? So anyways, to be able to point at, as you move forward as an organization, make sure your people are taken care of. Make sure you consider their lifestyle, any inequities that may exist with them, the things that they may need, like I mentioned earlier, childcare, transportation, maybe they need relocation assistance in some cases, or maybe you need to turn your roles virtual if it's possible. So you have to keep the worker in mind at every stage of the game as you reinvent yourself in the hospitality sector.
Yeah, and if I could give one, if a business owner asks me for a piece of advice about what's something that I could do right now to make sure that as I reopen my doors coming out of lockdown, I've prepared my staff and I've supported my staff for working in this new environment. And I would say there's two things. One, there's a lot of pent-up demand and a lot of very strung out people right now who may not read all the fine print, may not check out your website before they show up. And if they show up and then can't access your business because you're at capacity, train your people around de-escalation. Your frontline are going to be the one they're going to take the brunt of anybody's frustration. So train your people on de-escalation and then support them with mental health training and access to resources for their mental health, because they are the ones that they're your front line. They're the ones that the customers are going to be interacting with. And I hope to heavens that it's not a situation that you find yourself in at all, but give them the tools to be ready.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important point. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Just like putting on the oxygen mask in the airplane if you're going down. If you want to create an environment and foster an environment of mental health for others, first take care of yourself.
Right.
Sure, check in with yourself. Make sure your network is strong. If you are going into the workplace completely strung out and stretched out because you're exhausted and burnt out, the likelihood of you being able to create a positive, inclusive, welcoming environment for your workers is greatly challenging. So this is an incredible opportunity for mindfulness, for self-awareness, and that might have been something that we were afraid to talk about before the pandemic. It's never been more important. Most important question of the day is, how am I doing? Get yourself centered, go to work, impact the lives of the people around you.
I'm going to hashtag that, Joe. The most important question is, how am I doing? That is right. I love it.
Powerful advice, though. Certainly, it's a good reminder, right? We're all sort of struggling in different ways right now. So, how do you center, and how do you deal with that so you can support everyone else is a really important point. So we've talked a bit about the future and this workforce confidence and the consumer confidence piece. We have all these workers who have been laid off. Some of them went to, as Beth pointed out, to go and work in long-term care or in all sorts of other places because they had to, right? So what does it look like for us to bring them back? How do we attract them to return? And then what does the upskilling or reskilling look like? I mean, Beth, you raised a good point as well about some of the training that's needed around de-escalation and that sort of thing. But, more broadly, is there anything else that businesses should be thinking about at all levels, whether they're a small business or larger, related to bringing that workforce back to the industry?
Yeah, I think one area is definitely compensation. Here in the States, there are many workers who are on unemployment and they don't want to return to work because they're making more money on unemployment than what they can be offered in the workplace. So in order to disrupt that, organizations need to rethink what are they paying their workforce, reevaluate. And I think I was speaking to someone the other day and she was describing how even before the pandemic, coming back to work after being a mom, taking time off and having a gap in employment, it's been hard, because how do you express that gap? But in today's workforce, I think people need a little bit more understanding, to have a little more empathy and say, okay, you've had a gap in your employment. We're not considering that. What we're looking at are your skills. What skills do you bring to the table? And to Joe's point from before, you mentioned so many what we call soft skills. That is even tapping into the people who are neurodiverse, people who are on the spectrum. There are so many great people out there with talent that we often overlook. So all these organizations who are thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, start reconsidering women in the workforce and what they need, and your people with disabilities and what they can offer your organization and what they need. Accommodations is what I'm getting at. We need to start to show people, we want you here. We're willing to pay you. We're willing to help you with tools and resources that you might need to help you do your best and be your best at work. So I think we need to start seeing organizations invest in how do you attract and truly retain your workforce to make them want to be with you, right? It's like dating. You have to make this thing, have to make it worthwhile. Dario.
Thank you, Giselle. And I'm going to echo that. I feel that there's an opportunity to, of course, bring back that workforce that has been affected by the pandemic, but also look at potential new talent and looking from new graduates that are looking for opportunities out there. And it's just that these graduates or this new potential pool of individuals that are willing to come to the industry, they have options. There are options out there too. There will be options out there too. So how can we remain competitive to attract that talent? Not only from a benefits perspective, but what can we offer that is value added to these talented individuals that are looking to join either this workforce in the hospitality and tourism industry or a different workforce. There are, and how do you partner? So I'm talking about post-secondary institutions now. So what a great opportunity for organizations to partner with post-secondary institutions in the regions to leverage that. There are incredible benefits right now through the federal government and provincial government to support workforce transition. That's my day to day. I support our students who transition into the workforce. That's what we do. And there are incredible benefits. There are incredible tools. I talked about Prepr, for example, how online platforms are supporting students and industry connection to projects. There are so many innovative ways to engage the workforce, or the future workforce, with yourself. That I feel that this industry need to take advantage, because other industries are taking advantage, and they've been doing so for quite a while. So I believe it's important for us to elevate our profession, elevate all the great things that we can offer. We are not just long hours, low pay, because that's, potentially could happen with certain employers, but that's not the case everywhere. So how can we leverage that and sell who we really are?
We made the point earlier about organizations that are sharing talent. That can also be part of the partnership today. That doesn't have to stop. Why don't, rethinking, someone can work at your place, even as a freelancer, as a gig worker, continue to make their pay, but then they can shift and go over to where they're needed somewhere else. I think rethinking what work looks like and be more flexible in arrangements could help. And shorter hours, and a lot of people are experimenting with different ways to work and engage their workforce. Yeah.
Change in mindset. Beth said it before, change in mindset.
Yeah, and that's been one of the benefits of this pandemic, is that it's forced us to look at how do we work and how can we work differently. And so look at your own environment, look at your own workplace and try and reimagine it. And I love the notion and the concept of shared workforce, because we have such a seasonal type of industry that, wouldn't it be great if we were able to employ somebody 365, but they worked part-time, they worked for part of the year for one business and then worked part of the year for another business, because that's the seasonality of the industry.
Right.
Yeah, and if I can add, whether we like it or not, we are experiencing an historic moment in the tourism industry. And I like to say that if we are intentional about this, we will move into tourism 2.0, right? The next normal. So what happens in that space? We were in a talent shortage before the pandemic. Make no mistake about it, we are going to emerge in the middle of a talent war. And employers and businesses need to start considering unconventional sources of talent. And the good thing is, we have lots of them, but you need to be intentional and you need to go out and find them. Do some research, underrepresented groups in the workplace. Giselle mentioned creating positive, welcoming environments for people of different genders, different backgrounds, different cultural experiences in life. And I think that that's what is going to be required. We are going to need to adopt unconventional methods of recruitment, retention, training, development, advancement in order to keep our industry thriving. And the people who figure that out first will have the most success. And the good thing, again, as mentioned before, there are lots of organizations out there that are doing this work with you. TIO, George Brown College, the post-secondary education sector, the workforce innovation sector, a sector that many people don't really know because it's quite invisible. The organization I work for right now, OTEC, the Ontario Tourism Education Corporation, we are actively engaged in mapping the workforce, skills and competencies, creating micro-credentials, training opportunities, matching those skills with that learning, with potential employment opportunities, leveraging that technology. But this is a different world that we are entering, and it's going to require different tactics.
Absolutely. And, just being mindful of time, I do want to make sure we have some time for questions from the audience, because we do have some really good ones here, some of which tie into exactly what we were speaking about. Joe, you just mentioned micro-credentials. We do have a question related to that. Micro-learning and a modular approach to e-learning is gaining popularity. What advice do you have helping tourism in DMOs, provincial partners understand the costs of investing differently in asynchronous virtual instructor-led training and online blended learning to support tourism business recovery?
Yeah, amazing question. And I would say, let's think about this as collaboration over competition. Tourism industry employers, DMOs, organizations like that, don't need to be investing in micro-credentials themselves. Reach out to your local community college, your local university, your local workforce development organization. We are busy in the background working on developing all of these micro-credentials, because the most important thing is quality control, benchmarks. How do you know that the training, the education that you're investing in is actually going to deliver the skills that are required for people to be successful? So I would just say collaboration. Reach out. Don't be afraid. Find any one of us and we will connect you with your local college, your local university, workforce development organizations.
Perfect. And, Dario, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I do have another question related to, you're good, okay, related to hospitality graduates. So how do you see the opportunity for hospitality graduates for this year? Will there be gates opening for graduates, or is it more likely for companies to recall previous employees who might be laid off due to the pandemic?
I would like to defer that question to the team because they are the ones that are more connected to the industry. I am, but something that I want to add to that is the opportunity to engage with these graduates. That's what I was mentioning before. How are we engaging with the future pool of talent? What type of engagement projects do we have? Do we have any work integrated learning partnership with post-secondary institutions that supports the transition of these graduates into the workforce? As I mentioned before, there are incredible benefits out there for you to bring students and recent graduates into the workforce, tackle those federal benefits and some provincial funding. So I'm optimistic that the industry will recover sooner than later, but I would like to hear for the rest of the team. Maybe Beth, you can give us a little bit of the outlook on that as well. But there are plenty of mechanisms to support graduates into the workforce.
Yeah, and I would actually kind of go a step further. We know it's going to be a hot job market as we come out of this pandemic. And it's never too early to start to convince somebody that this is the industry for them. So if you're in a community where your local high school has, a high skills major program specializing in tourism, reach out to that school and see how you can get involved with those students. See if there is a work integrated, a co-op type of placement. I think co-op is now no longer the word to use, but I'm old school. But if there is an opportunity, we employ so many young people in our industry. We're the highest employer of young people. We give so many young people their first job, and therefore their first on-the-job training, their first experience at, autonomy. And so, get involved in those programs too. And as we go forward, then hopefully we encourage those graduates from those programs to go into the college university programs that, as we've already talked about, are world class. Let's start developing our own talent pool.
I'd add to look where the direction of investment is in the organization. So over this pandemic, we've seen an uptick in many industries paying attention to, like, the CIO and operations have had to come together, and the CFO as well, to try to think of, again, safety and making people return. But key areas where students can be leaning in now and organizations can lean on is the investments in analytics. People, no matter what industry it is, there is this push towards analytics and how do you use data to make better decisions and plan and forecast as much as possible to gain visibility. So I see a great career path even in hospitality, for people to lean into analytics, to lean into artificial intelligence and automation, those types of technologies that are going to be behind the scenes, not necessarily replacing people, but creating new types of work opportunities. You mentioned earlier, Beth, sustainability and carbon footprint and all the things on the environment. That skill set isn't going to be in high demand, all the way from oil and gas down to every industry that it impacts. So we need more people on that social and environmental responsibility and that skill set, even in hospitality. So just to say, there's a lot of key areas that that people can move into the hospitality space into, apart from the normal roles that we've thought of before. Quick example, have you guys heard of Postmates? Postmates is like this, it's a little robot that delivers your food for you, and poor campus students have been like hijacking this poor robot. So when they flip this robot over on its side to make the delivery, mind you, a human is not having to make the delivery anymore. It's a robot that's doing it, whatever you ordered on Postmates. There is a human at the end of it, usually probably a high school or college student, who is good at gaming and good at remote control access, and they take over this bot and they are able to intercept if something's gone wrong. So this is a new role that didn't exist before. And these are the types of things that technology comes in, and it doesn't always just displace people, it creates new opportunities. So
I've always said you can have any kind of skill set, you can have any kind of interest, accounting, marketing, AI, and on, and you can work in our industry.
Yeah.
We need all of those skill sets in order to tourism is not just vacations, it's business.
Mm-hmm.
It's an economy. It provides revenue to government bottom line. It helps to pay for things like healthcare and education. It's business first.
Yeah, and brilliant feedback by the panelists here. For students who are looking for opportunities in the hospitality and tourism industry right now, recent graduates, past graduates, no matter what you're dealing with, there are always 4 things you can do that are free and will get you where you want to go. You ready for them? LMNO: learning, mindfulness, networking, and optimism. All free, and you get out of them as much as you put into them. It's a challenging time, so challenge yourself. Be disciplined, be focused, be obsessed with your goals, and you will find what you're going for. There's no shortage of challenges, but there's also no shortage of opportunities. You just have to start within and really drive yourself.
Yes,
absolutely.
A couple more questions here. I do have one about how do the panelists see the fastest growing Canadian demographic outside of immigration, the Indigenous population, fit into labor shortages and the future of tourism? I know we talked about diversity and inclusion earlier, but certainly a very pertinent topic.
Well, the Indigenous product here in Canada is the fastest growing tourism sector, and which is fantastic. And we are seeing over and over investments into this sector, whether it's in product development, teaching storytellers and knowledge owners how to interact with customers, how to better tell their story, and we need to continue to make sure that we include not only that product but also the people who work within that sector as part of our conversation. It's an incredibly important sector to our industry, especially here in Canada.
Yeah, I think, I like to say that diversity is a principle and inclusion is an action. And if we want to include our Indigenous peoples in our workplace, then our employers need to start with education. There has never been a better time to access education that will support your awareness, learning, growth, development, so that you can be a welcoming place for the Indigenous people of this country. It's critical, it's important, and it's absolutely something we all need to be doing much more of, and we need to get better at it. And like any learning journey, you don't need to have the answers now. You just need to know that you don't have the answers and start looking for them.
As someone who's non-Canadian, I will give a generalized answer here. But years ago, Target opened up to small businesses and they allowed people to submit their products. It went bananas. It was wild. The reception that customers had to small type business owners. Today, you have Magnolia Network that's selling so well from, if you watch Fixer Upper with Joanna Gaines. So it opened the door for small businesses to be able to become a part of a larger corporation. And it went very well. It speaks to the people. So I would say if you're an organization out there in the hospitality sector, can you in some shape or fashion support your small businesses or those organizations that are owned by Indigenous people? Can you create funnels of their services that you can add on? Can you promote their products within your space? Can you partner? We were talking about partnerships before. So there is a level of partnership at the ground level that can pave a way for Indigenous people. Secondly, you guys mentioned earlier partnerships. Government plays a big role. So if government can promote and educate and give funding and move forward the efforts of the Indigenous people, then I think that's a great pathway as well.
And also from a post-secondary educational institutions, what are we doing to support the learning and the growth and support the transition into the workplace for particular groups, in this particular case, Indigenous. And they are, going back to your point, Giselle, great partnerships that can be created or are being created by post-secondary institutions, industry, and the government. So I feel that we are all moving in the right direction to achieve that goal and to increase that pool of talented candidates for our
so as we move to wrap up the panel, there's one more question here that we sort of touched on a number of ways that I think is pertinent, and it's what role does mental health play in the industry? So perhaps we can each add a point to that, and any closing thoughts. And then we'll wrap up. So Daria, why don't you get us started on that?
I believe Giselle and Beth and Joe, all of us, we've been talking about how mental health is key on supporting or maintain, and what we talk about sustainability. I believe it starts with us, but then what are we doing as an organization, as a post-secondary institution, to support the mental health either of students and future talent or our employees? Resources are needed, no doubts about it. Education is needed. So the question is, and I'm going to put it out to the organizations, what are you doing about it? Not only to sustain your current employees, also to attract new talent. But mental health has affected all of us, in the last year, and it has been affecting all of us for many, many years, forever, but now has been escalated with the pandemic. So we all went through that. So we are going through that. So what are we doing about it? And I believe Joe mentioned that we are not shy to talk about that anymore. We all, we are open for this discussion, which is a great benefit to engage in these meaningful conversations.
I like that you mentioned there's a responsibility on employers, because you can create a program for mental health and all great, and people can be having conversations, etc. But if the source of their stress is still something that the organization, the employer can fix, and they're not fixing it, then what are we really doing? If someone has childcare issues, if they're not being paid well, if they're trying to figure out how to make ends meet in this space, if they don't see a future potential, that's a big area of stress for people. So I think fixing some of those practical things that an employer can do will do so much for mental health itself.
That's a great point. That there is what does the individual do, and what do we do from a supporting mental health perspective. But a lot of it does stem from very real and practical considerations, for sure. Joe, I know you just shared a resource, and we will post that link, but I'd love your thoughts as well.
Yeah, the resource that I shared is great work coming out of a couple of people who put together an organization to develop mental health training that specifically addresses substance abuse in the hospitality industry. Not9to5.org is the site. Everybody should go check it out. Yeah, look, life is a challenge, undoubtedly. The best thing we can do as employers and as an industry is to try to reduce that stigma of mental health being something that we aren't tolerant of. It's critically important. We need to tread lightly, we need to be open, we need to be mindful, and we need to constantly search for and create resources. And I think that, you know, the best way to arrive at a place that is better than the one that we are in right now is to, quite frankly, deal with the reality that we haven't figured it all out. And I think that it's just been an amazing time for those of us who have been focusing on integrating mental health in our lives, in our workplaces, in our communities, because we're finally having conversations that we should have been having a long time ago. And we're muddling our way through and trying to figure it out. And, you know, we don't have the answer. I don't think there is a single solitary answer. I think life is tremendously complex, and we're all dealing with much more than we ever get to demonstrate. And quite frankly, anything that you can do in the workplace and in your life to be more tolerant, to be more patient, to be more kind, really helps people cope with whatever they're coping with. We're all in this together. That's the truth of it.
That's right.
Yeah. So I would just add, you know, check in on people. You know, I check in on my team all the time. You know, as a trade organization, our members are calling us. We're their vetting point. We're the ones that are on the other end of the phone when they have nobody else to talk to. And so, you know, we've made sure that we've given our team the supports that they need in order to cope with all of that. But we've also been taking it to our members. And in fact, on Friday, you know, Joe mentioned earlier that we're in the middle of our Tourism Issues Forum at TIO this year, and or this week. And on Friday, we actually have Not 9 to 5 as our keynote speaker Friday morning, and it's there are free tickets available still if you're interested. Just hit our website at tiaontario.ca and click through to the Tourism Issues Forum, and you can register there. But you know, it's been one of those things that we've incorporated it into all of the work that we're doing, all our programming that we've been doing since this pandemic started, and it won't be something that we stop. We will continue doing it. I think it's part of the 360, making sure we're looking after all parts of ourselves and our business, and you know, it's the right thing to do.
Well, I think that's a very poignant point to end on. So thank you to all of our panelists for sharing all of your insights with us today. And you know, as we look to that road to recovery, definitely some great resources that were also shared for anyone who is tuned in. Do check the event chat. We've shared most of those resources with you there. And we'll also be sharing the recording if there's anything that you would like to refer back to. A very warm thank you to all of you. This was really excellent, and we're looking forward to continuing on in terms of looking at the future of the industry.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for having us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For everyone else who's tuning in, please do stay with us for the next portion of today's event. We're going to be talking about co-innovation and the Industry Future Challenge series. And Solara is also going to be coming back and talking a bit about building a Learn Lab. So how do we start to put into place you know, the upskilling and the reskilling that we need, and supporting learners with things like micro-credentials and learning on the go, and making that an easier process for them as well. So please do stay for that portion. We are going to be starting it now. So thanks again to the panelists, and we will be in touch shortly.